Hey guys, and welcome to Follow My Edit, the show where you and I work on the same image together, step by step. In today's episode, we're going to edit this into this. And if you are anything like me, I learn much better by doing than just watching. So in the description down below, there's a link to download the same raw file that I'll be working on so you can literally follow my edit. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy the process. Let's get started. Alrighty, let's jump right in. We'll be tackling this super cute hyena puppy together that is representative for an HDR shot, a high dynamic range photograph. This image was taken in the Okavango Delta on a beautiful morning with very, very soft orangey tones and light. It's always really important that you're able to remember the scenario or the scene you shot it in, because when you edit, you want to get as close as possible to what you were feeling and seeing at that very moment in time. So let's have a look at it first. We have this hyena puppy that is obviously in the shade. You see that little golden rim by its beard and underneath the armpits, on top of the crest. That means the sun is shining from the other side. The whole idea is to get the golden light back into the image while retaining the detail in the hyena pup, which is dark. It is almost a type of HDR photograph. Not a photograph where we bracket 3 shots and we'll layer them, not in this one, as a hyena was walking and I couldn't get the same pose in 3 exposures, but a single frame where I will try and bring our highlights and whites back and try and bring our shadows and darks back, and that's what will give it an HDR feeling at the end of the day. As you can see, I will be using Lightroom Classic for this edit, but not to worry if you're using any of the other Adobe post-processing products, the tools I'll be teaching you will be exactly the same. If you haven't been working with Lightroom much at all, why don't you hop over to our Pangolin Photo Academy, where I have a full-on Lightroom course for beginners that will set you up for success. However, if you're using an entirely different editing suite, you can still make use of the tools I'll be teaching you. I'll be talking about cropping and dodge and burning, all those post-production skills that you should be finding in any of the high-end post-production softwares. So just follow the process no matter what you are using. So that morning we had a young hyena, actually still a puppy, about just under a year old, passing by this lovely little still standing water. And my goal was to try and catch the reflection, to catch all 4 limbs separate, and to see the eye. I think I accomplished that quite well, but let's have a look at my settings. 800ths of a second is relatively slow. That's quite risky. And quite frankly, at 500 ISO, I could have pushed my shutter speed some more. I remember it was very early in the morning and I started off with a slow shutter because there wasn't a lot of light. And the moment that puddle of water came up, light was reflecting back and I had a lot more light than the split second before without paying attention to my ISO. I didn't notice that I could have raised my shutter speed. So let's have a quick look if our picture is actually sharp. I will always do that in my navigator. I magnify by 100%. I use Navigator to get to my eye. And as I look at this picture, I sadly notice multiple things. I do have some motion blur in the bottom of the port. Let me magnify some more just to clarify what that looks like. You see it's not razor sharp, it's moving. And also, I feel like I have been focusing on the chest here. The eye, on the other hand, again, I'm going to over magnify, you see, isn't as crisp as what my hair is. So on 400%, you can never expect a pixel to be 100% sharp. But looking at this, I am slightly, just by an inch, out of focus because the head is standing just that little bit in front of the chest, in front of the body. Even though the whole hyena is turned parallel sideways on 2.8 of an f-stop, that is always the risk. Remember, if you have the privilege of shooting an f2.8 lens, you do not have to shoot on 2.8. You paid all that money to be able to. That morning it was very dark. That is why I had my aperture wide open. However, it resulted in a slight out of focus blur. I really like the picture though. I like the feel. I like the pose of the hyena. I like the reflection. And it is such a slight touch out of focus that I'm going to try and work with it. And maybe we're going to finish off with some Topaz AI sharpening process. After checking my settings and my sharpness, I'm going to have a brief look at my histogram. I shot it on a plus 1.3 exposure value. That means I shot it really bright. That's also the reason why you can't see much of that golden tone I'm talking about. Why on earth would I shoot it so bright? Let's have a look at the histogram, which is where that mystery is hidden. My histogram is leaning to the right. That means that I have more data in the higher end of my midtones, as well as my highlights. That is exactly what I like. My data is very healthy there. I can always darken this shot in retrospective without losing any quality whatsoever. However, you see the darkest part of this shot is the very hyena, and I really do not want to have to lighten up my hyena significantly. I could, Lightroom allows me to. However, if I do so, that is where I'm going to find all the noise. And I don't want to be creating an extra amount of noise on my subject specifically. This scenario is even more important when you have very little light. Remember, it was early in the morning and I had that in the back of my mind. I have this little peak here, which would be my water. So let's have a look. If I burned anything by ticking that little triangle, I burned a tiny little bit of the water, but in turn, the majority of my hyena data sits in the shadows rather than being pushed towards the blacks. My data in the shadows and the blacks is not as healthy as my data in the highlights, because very often we have the tendency of wanting to push that data up towards the midtones. And again, that is where I find my noise. If you don't intend to brighten this data, it's just fine. So now that we had a proper look at our histogram, at our settings, and whether this picture is sharp, and I'm happy with what I wanted to get out of it, let's dive right into the editing process. In order to approach this photograph, I will start off with my crop, like most days. I really don't want to be clipping our backside in the reflection either at the bottom or the actual hyena on the top, but I'm planning of getting rid of all that green grass because I feel it doesn't fit our pastel colors that I find. So I just want to crop in a little bit. You might notice that I have really attempted to give the hyena lots of space to the left side into the direction it walks into. And I kind of like this diagonal line leading up to our hyena, almost like a leading line. But those type of lines should never pull straight out of our corners. So I like it from the distance of the bottom third here to the distance of the bottom third there. It gives us a very even feeling. I like to check my navigator if I feel whether my picture is balanced, because you do not focus so much on little details, but more whether the grand scheme of the image feels balanced. And I feel it's a little bit tight up here. Even though I'm attempting to cut out the grass, I'm gonna try and give it some more space to the back and maybe just crop a little bit more both top and bottom, to make these a bit more even. Now I got rid of the grass. I feel this is quite even, and I am giving this hyena lots of space to breathe and walk towards the left side, also to give our imagination space. Where's that puppy walking to? Is there mom? Is there maybe some breakfast waiting for him? And that is the beauty about storytelling in photography. I press return or enter to confirm my selection, and after that I will press my basic tab. In the lighter version of Lightroom, that will be your light tab. If you guys do like this format and get to learn from it, please like this video below or even subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next one. Just like always, even though it's an HDR type feel, I will start with my whites and blacks. I'm pretty happy with my overall exposure. I like that my histogram is leaning to the right because my hyena is so dark. So I'm not gonna mess with my overall exposure. I'm going to start with whites and blacks, and I will be editing for the hyena pup itself because that is where I'm trying to get the detail on. If I'm messing up the background at this point, I'm not too worried because my priority is a hyena puppy. I know I have the data for the background itself, and I can always get into the background at a later stage. I'm a wildlife photographer, so I prioritize the wildlife in my editing process. In the whites, I'm expecting that little bit of water to burn. We already checked that. I'm gonna pour the whites further and further. You see I'm burning more and more water, but what I wanna find is my hyena. And you see I find it very late on. I find the rim of my hyena, the ear, the rim on the legs, and I'm gonna pull that white back until that rim around the hyena is not visible anymore, somewhere there. While pressing my Option or my Alt key, that is what gives me the clear view whether I burn something. Alternatively, you can always tick the top right. If I hover over here, I see I have no red around my hyena, so I didn't burn it. Then I'm going to do the same with my blacks, holding the Option and Alt key. I'm going to pull the blacks, and again I'm finding these blacks fairly late on, even though my hyena is quite dark. So I'm going to pull it until I find blacks in my hyena. Not yellows, not oranges, blacks. That's somewhere here. That made it very, very dark. So in turn, if I now want to get more detail again on my hyena, I will have to pull the shadows out. Remember, that's a little bit dangerous as that is what produces noise, but we also made it a bit darker first. And I don't press my Option and Alt key in this step. I do that according to my tummy feeling. I'm going to pull it until I'm happy with the amount of detail I see in the fur. And I feel, even though I addressed my whites and blacks very scientifically, I'm going to pull them back a bit. I find them a little bit too harsh on this little puppy, just a tad. There we go. I'm quite happy with this. You can make it more or less, but yeah, we want it quite light because our background is also pretty bright, so we want that hyena to match our background. And then I'm going to take the highlights, and in wildlife photography, my highlights 99% of the time go all the way to the left. The only time that will not happen is in our low-key shots, and we will edit one of those together one of these days if you stick with the series. I'm going to bring it down, and the whole idea is to get more detail in the brighter fur. So where's our fur brighter? That would be at the rim up here, that would be by the tail. And I'm going to bring it down, and you see it becomes more visible. The individual strand becomes more visible. Remember, 400% is over magnified there, but I just don't want that glaring white. I want some off-white in that rim, some golden color. All right. Now I should have a perfect exposure. Not so much in the water. Our water is still burned, but in my hyena, I am not touching texture and clarity. I find the contrast in this hyena very strong anyway, and I do not want to mess up that beautiful, soft, buttery looking background by touching texture clarity. Vibrance and saturation I won't touch for now. We might come back to that step. I'm going to close my basic tab, and I'm now going to go into my color mixer. The color mixer is there to ask yourself and train your brain, are you happy with the color that you're seeing? Right now, because our background isn't quite there yet, it is quite difficult to answer this question. I have a feeling there's a lot of green tones in my gold, which I'm not too happy with. I want my sunrise to lean more towards the warmer tones, the reds and the pinks. So I have a feeling that I will be working with my hues on my yellow and orange sunrise. Right now though, I want to make sure I get the overall background set first before I go into the color mixers. So let's put this on the back burner. You see, it's not always the most straightforward line of thinking, and that's why I want to take you along on this journey. Then we go into our details. In our details, very technical, very boring step. It's simply there to sharpen the picture. Lightroom does it for you already by 40 points. Any raw file will be pre-sharpened unless you set so differently in your presets amongst your import. It is a good idea to sharpen them, and I show you exactly why. If we have a look at our Hyena, unsharpened, it becomes very soft. Let's again over magnify to truly see, and we already determined this is sort of my sharpest spot. Look how blurry this looks when it's unsharpened. On the other hand, look how crunchy and horrible it looks when you sharpen it fully, and I'm only working on 500 ISO, so it could get much worse on higher ISOs. We do not want that crunchy effect. So let's find a medium between blurry and too crunchy. In order to do that, I want to take you along on a journey where we decide which pixel exactly will be sharpened so that we don't harm and crunch the overall surface area of our photo. It is totally irrelevant to sharpen any of these areas. Matter of fact, we want the background nice and soft. And it is also somewhat irrelevant whether we sharpen this particular area over here, even though it is on our Hyena. What we do want to sharpen is individual outlines. Areas where we have high contrast, white going into dark, that is where we want to really sharpen. And the way we do that is by taking this masking slider and grabbing our Option and Alt key once again and pulling it. And what happens here is you define the area that will be sharpened by your algorithm. Everything that's white will be sharpened, everything that's black will be left alone and will not receive that crunchy effect. So as you can see, the masking was on 0 initially, nothing is left out, everything is sharpened, and as we pull it, we define the exact areas. And I really want to keep that mostly to our Hyena pup. Most days I mask between 80 and 100 points. When you go to your neighbor who wasn't on safari with you, they should be able to kind of tell what animal you're showing them. And I think at 91 points of masking, everybody can kind of tell the shape of a hyena. There we go. I'm going to over magnify once more. I'm going to go somewhere here. Remember, it wasn't the sharpest Hyena to start off with. I'm going to bring it all the way to the right so you can see the crunch occur on the outlines, around the eye, around the forehead, and then you're going to bring it back until the crunch does not bother you anymore. And that's somewhere here for me. I don't find it destructive here. That means we can sharpen this Hyena by 86 points instead of 40 without harming most of our image. And if I just bring the mask back for once, remember it was at 91 points. Have a look, if we didn't mask, how much more crunchy and almost noisy our image looks like. This makes no difference in an Instagram shot on your phone. But if you want to print or show it on a larger digital screen, your TV, have a presentation, that makes a huge difference. Now that we have our details right, I now want to go into our individual masks. We've we need to work a little bit more on our hyena. I still find the face quite dark. My eyes do not fall straight towards the face. And I find it almost a bit too contrasty. It's a puppy. I want it soft and cuddly, and not just because I shot it blurry to start off with. And then I want to get into our background. I want to create that morning feel, that soft haze that was almost in the air. You can sort of grasp it from the raw file, but the raw file has lost it. So let's have a look. Let's start with our hyena. We're going to grab our subject. Yay, well done Lightroom. I don't have to fix up anything in this instance. I'm going to go to 100% so I see a little bit better. Let me close that for you. And what I'm going to do is, very often I increase clarity and texture, but I already said I don't like the amount of contrast on this hyena. I find it almost a little bit too contrasty. So I'm going to press O. O stands for mask overlay, to get rid of the red. It also goes away when you just pull any of the sliders. And I'm actually going to soften my clarity a bit. And you know, that will make it look almost younger. It's kind of like Instagram filter for us humans. But it will make it look softer, fluffier. We don't want it taunt looking and old looking. You see how old it looks when I bring it to the right. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. And now I'm going to bring the shadows up a tad more, just so our attention falls a little bit more towards the hyena puppy. But because this area of the pup is already quite bright, in the shade, but quite bright, I'm going to take a separate brush. I'm going to make my brush quite large, maybe around just under 20 points. I have my feather, my flow, my density very high, and I'm just going to give that nose a little dapple. And I forgot to turn my auto mask on, so let's return that. Do it again. Press your auto mask so that it doesn't dapple over the face. You see now it's stood nicely on the face rather than overflowing. And all I'm going to do, just one soft dapple, is going to bring the exposure up a bit, just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to make it a little bit warmer so that it feels a little bit more like the golden outline on the crest. But now I feel it's a bit flat. Yeah, I want it bright, but I don't want it flat. So I'm going to make the blacks a little bit blacker and the whites a bit whiter. Whenever you feel something is a bit flat, pulling the blacks and whites apart, even in just a small section of your image, increases the contrast again. So let's have a look what that did. I'm going to turn the eye on and off. And you see, without losing contrast, it looks a bit sunnier, it looks a bit more sunrisey, and it looks a bit brighter. Very nice. I might do the same on the bum. I'm going to make my brush even a little bigger because I find all that quite dark. So the areas that are just a bit dull, and just bring it up a little bit. And you see I dapple very softly, maybe that area, boom. Just so our puppy looks bright, sunny, like it just got up and is ready to go, even though it's a nocturnal animal, I know. There we go. I find that very pretty. Now we're going to go into our background. And our background is a bit too bright. We don't want to burn it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to decide whether I'm going to select the whole background or whether I want to select sort of just the outskirts up here and up here. And I don't want to darken the sandy area much more. You see how busy that sandy area looks. I'm going to keep it bright and unnoticeable. But down here, these really white spots, they need to become a bit darker. So what I'm going to do, you could do two things. You could take a linear gradient and just pull that in from the bottom. Or alternatively, you could take a luminance range and just say, you know, those really white spots, I don't like them. Make it a little bit, yeah, there we go. But now we're also using the sand again, and I really don't want that. So I'm gonna go with a linear gradient I find that soft, it bleeds in, and I'm just going to bring my exposure down a bit and my whites down a bit. And look at that, we're not burning anything anymore. There we go, that was my whole idea. We checked it up here on our little triangle. Next one is my radial gradient. I shot this on a 2.8 f-stop, so it's very soft to start off with, as you can see. And I don't really need to soften it much more. But let's say you shot it on a 6.3 or a 7.1 lens. So I would then pull a radial gradient elliptically across the plane that my hyena is in. And my hyena is not up there. That is about 1.5 meters behind my hyena. My hyena is standing right in this plane, in this line. I'm going to invert this whole idea. And I'm going to choose that it needs to bleed a little bit more because I don't have a ton of depth. I'm kind of shooting down on this hyena pup. This is not too far off, so it needs to bleed a bit more. And now I'm going to subtract my hyena. Boom, there we go. Now I'm going to create a very natural bleeding in, bleeding out depth of field. So you can blur it more here as it becomes crisper towards our hyena and blur it out more towards the back if we target our clarity and texture. You can bring that down just a little bit, bring the texture down a bit. In my case, I won't do an awful lot. Like it was shot on a 2.8, it doesn't need much more. If you have a lot more definition in your sand, you can just tone it down a bit and it will steer the focus more towards your hyena. Now, I want to create that sunrise look again. In order to do that, I'm going to bring my warmth up a little bit, just so that it looks that the sun that's hitting the hyena on the backside here also sort of infuses the dust in the air behind with golden sunshine. I like that. Very nice. To finish off my masks, the way I normally do is I'm going to look for harsh shadows. Well, we addressed any bad shadows on our hyena already, and I'm going to look for hot spots. Are there hot spots that really bother us? This is a smudge, not a hot spot. Does it bother us? I don't know. These areas are still a bit too bright, and they do very much distract from our hyena. So I'm going to bring that down, and I really want to address only the areas in the water. So I'm going to take a luminance mask. I'm going to select a brush, turn the water mask off, and take all these off because I want my rim to shine bright. The rim is not what's distracting us from our hyena. It leads our eye towards the hyena. It's the water, and I'm going to bring the water down a bit. Yes, it can be brighter than the rest of the water, but it shouldn't distract our eye and pull our focus down into the picture all the time. Yeah, I like that. Now we've talked about the color. My color is still too green. Now that I can see the water properly, because I brought it back with my masks, my radial gradient, my linear gradient, my luminance range, I'm going to go into my color mixer. And this is very golden, but to me it still has a green touch, and that's something that you can train your eye towards. Green would be on this side, and you see how much yellow is in that water. More red would be towards this side. Let's see how it looks with the orange. Green on that side, that would be the rim and the bum of the hyena, left on that side. So obviously what you could do is take this little pinpointer or go to point color and just use that pinpointer all together. That's one way, and you see it's a combination of yellows and a little bit of orange. The reason I sometimes like the overall color is because it affects your entirety of yellow, and it trains your eye to look, what color am I looking at? What is that? It's great training for your eyes. It's fun, actually. So I'm going to bring my yellows down a little bit more to the redder side. It makes it look more earthy, more golden, and less green. And bring the oranges a little bit down towards the redder side. Do I want it stronger? Do I want a strong sunset? No. To me, I like the pastel colors. I like the softness. That's why we also took the clarity down in the pup a bit. I find there's some odd red tones here. Let's have a look. Is there any red tones? Not sure. Let's go in 100% on that ear. I'm going to take that pinpointer because I'm not sure what I'm looking at. And it's mostly orange, so maybe down a bit. But remember, it doesn't just affect the ear, it affects everything. So instead of doing the overall color, I think I'm just going to take a little brush. I'm going to go into these really odd shiny bits. And my auto mask isn't on. I've got to be careful. This is really oddly. And I'm going to just bring the saturation down a little bit. Not a lot, a little bit more natural. There we go. And now we are very close to my desired end result. If you do like it a little bit more colorful, you can work on your vibrance. Depends how strong you want your sunrise. It comes in all colors and shades. You can bring your saturation down a bit again. I like bringing the vibrancy up and the saturation down. It gives a very soft, natural color. But that is up to you. Now, next, do we want to actually alter anything in this picture? That is up to you. Honestly, if you post it as the best wildlife photographer in the world, refrain from altering too much. When you go to competitions, it's often not allowed. But if you want to hang it up on your wall and it's your piece of art, you're the artist, you do whatever you want with it. You could, for instance, get rid of that last bit of green. That kind of bugs me. You could, for instance, get rid of that little smudge. Nowadays, Lightroom has a fantastic way of using generative AI. This is a bit small, make it bigger, and you could just get rid of that. Remove. Well done. And if we go to our little smudge, there we go. Make it a bit bigger. It's not over the eye on the reflection, which helps. We could get rid of that, but sometimes it's just little insects in the water, and I honestly don't mind them. Do you like it better with the spots, without the spots? That is up to you. I'm going to leave it like that for now. And now, as I promised, how do we get this hyena sharper? If we press F, we can go to full screen. Does it bother you? It's maybe 0.05% off. That is why AI can help, because it is not too strongly off. But let's see. If I go into edit, you could go into Topaz Photo AI or Topaz Sharpen. Let me go into Topaz Sharpen itself. And I'm going to take the tile view on up here, the comparison view. And because it's not very hard, I'm going to give all the normal algorithms: out of focus normal, too soft normal, and standard. You can choose them as you like, and we can have a look. Quite frankly, I see way too many artifacts in this. Too soft might work, not sure if it truly helps. We know it's out of focus. We know the paw is motion blurred. The paw is not my concern, it's the face. It is out of focus, so let's grab the out of focus algorithm. I'm going to go to the split view, and I am not a big fan of what it does to my tail. That is way too sharp. That is way too fake. It looks like AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refine my focus selection. My body was fine. It was sharp. It was good. I had no problem with it. So I'm going to take the sharpening algorithm off the entire hyena. And now I'm going to stick to the face. And instead of taking the algorithm off entirely by the face and the ear, I'm going to take the opacity down maybe to 36 or a bit more. And I'm going to apply this algorithm much softer on most of my face. So I'm going to soften it down. You can see up here it's now a light gray instead of a white. Again, whatever is white is being sharpened. It's a similar concept. And I'm going to just leave it strong on the eye. And I'm going to press update. And now when I use this, my butt isn't sharpened any further. And as I bring it across, I just see a little bit more sharpness in my eye. I still see some artifacts there. I'm going to over magnify, and I'm not a big fan of these artifacts. So I'm going to refine some further. And I'm going to just take that around in here. Update. Is there anything else that bugs me? You know what? It's a little bit sharper around the nose. Remember, we're over magnified. Go back to 100%. I'm pretty happy with that. And we could pixel peep and say it is not 100% crisp, and I promise you, you print this very large on your wall, nobody will ever notice because nobody will stand that close to your image. Pixel peeping is something you will only ever do on your computer. So that is roughly my final outcome. I'm really happy with it. I like it a lot. I love the feel, the atmosphere, and I hope you enjoyed it. You learned how to get the shadows a bit softer, a bit brighter, a bit lighter, almost like you used a fill-in flash on this hyena or a strobe, which we never want to do. It can be done if you shot it correctly with your histogram leaning to the right-hand side and then brightening it just a little bit in Lightroom. Without truly burning our whites though, we don't want the histogram to lean so far over that we burn our whites, so that we can also save the golden color of the background and bring that sunrise back into our picture. As always, post-production is highly subjective, and as you saw in my thought process, not always linear. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below if you liked it or what you might have done differently. Looking forward to seeing you on a pangolin photo safari soon. Bye bye.